Hi everybody and welcome. We're here today with Mike and Joy and Greg to talk all about local. I'm absolutely delighted and I'm super enthusiastic. I talked to Mike earlier this week on my podcast and he is absolutely awesome. Talked to Greg yesterday, awesome as well. Talked to Joy very briefly just now, who Mike is incredibly enthusiastic about. So I'm super duper overexcited about this whole thing. Let's start with you, Joy. Sterling Sky Incorporated in Canada. Please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I run an agency. We're fairly small. There's about 17 of us here and in the US and Canada. And we just do all things local SEO. So our customers are anything from car dealers to lawyers to lawn care providers, and we love it.
Right. Okay, no, so small team, but big knowledge from what I've understood. We've got loads of people from all around the world, and we're saying them. I'll let everybody read that. There's no point in me saying it. Mike, please present yourself.
I would add one thing to Joy's resume, and that is that she is the CEO of Local U and puts on great conferences, and one's coming up, just to plug it, in April. I think it's the best conference in local, and I can't say enough about it. So me, I am a child of retail, grew up in retail, had my own retail store, which was great until it wasn't, and it failed miserably at the hands of Walmart and Amazon. I've been involved in local on the internet since the failure of my business in the early 2000s. And basically, I just explore local. I think it's an incredible area. And my motto, as you know, is all local, all the time.
I love that catch line. What is it? Pitch line, whatever it might be called. All local, all the time. Greg, you're not all local all the time, or are you?
Well, now I'm virtual, but in some sense, yes. I mean, I've been in the, it's hard to define this space. When we say local, people mean different things, but I've been in this sort of arena of local location marketing as an analyst, as a tech journalist, as a researcher since basically 1999, with a focus on small businesses, but more recently on consumer behavior and enterprises. And I'm not a marketer in the same way that Joy is. I'm not running campaigns, but I study the space and I've been following it from before the days of Google Maps, and have seen it evolve, and I'm fascinated by it. And it people don't really understand, that this is a much bigger and more impactful arena than e-commerce. It's trillions and trillions of US dollars and euros that. It's really about the internet's influence on offline behavior. That's sort of how I describe what I do, what I track.
From where I sit, local is going to eat the internet.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Wonderful. I mean, that whole idea that small businesses run the world. I mean, Margaret Thatcher in my youth in the UK was one of the first people I heard talking about that. And the idea that all of these tiny companies built together or brought together are actually more or drive more business than the bigger companies, perhaps. But that isn't the topic of today. The topic of today is how can these small individual businesses drive traffic and business with the right tools and tactics? And it seems to me that we have the strategic people, Mike and Greg, and the actual practical person, Joy, right here with us today. So for the audience, if you or when you have questions, please do pop them in the chat. We'll try to get to them as soon as we possibly can. But we're going to start off with Mike's presentation, which I've been incredibly excited to hear, which covers 7 really interesting bullet points. I'll let you take it away because there's no point in me saying or spoiling the surprise.
While Mike is fiddling with his computer, let me just interject something for the audience, which is with Mike and Joy and Joy in particular, you have a really rare opportunity to get a lot of very specific questions answered that you're not going to get easily answered elsewhere. So I would queue up the questions because this is really a golden opportunity.
Thank you for that.
Sorry, Joy.
So I started a research project with a very small diner in my local community. And this is from a presentation that I first did at Local U last year. You can see the whole presentation at Gather Up. I've recorded the whole thing in an hour, roughly an hour-long video. So a lot of which was cut out. A lot of the details and sort of nuance was cut out of this presentation. But if you want it, you can go find it at Gather Up. So having been in local, this is a report from a local client of mine that I still consult with. And I was looking to understand with them where were calls and driving directions and high intent activity coming from. And what we found in the last time I looked, which was Q4 2019, we saw less than 2% from Yelp, 2% from Facebook, 8% from the website, most of which came from Google, and 88% of these high intent activities into this retail location were coming directly from Google. In other words, Google had become her most prominent marketing place on the internet. This varies a lot by industry and store, but it's particularly true in restaurants where Google is really making a very powerful, strong effort to create an environment where they become the dominant presence in terms of presentation. It's ever more transactional, where you can see Google taking orders or not reserving tables these days, but taking orders, and much more visual. And these are long-term trends that have occurred in Google. So when I came upon a new restaurant that was on my bike route to work in May of 2018, I got really excited because it was multiple opportunities to see if I could help them pro bono develop a Google presence and see how much it would impact them. It was a small restaurant, only 9 tables, and they were outside the main restaurant district of a town of 13,000. So it was a very interesting possibility for me, and I love diner food. And this place had plenty of challenges. The only thing she knew was Facebook. That was all she had. She wasn't listed in any directory. She didn't have a Google listing when I just rode my bike by that day in late May. She had no website. She had no budget. I mean, she didn't have any money to spend on marketing. And she was away from the main restaurant district by about 1.5 miles, which, as you know, in local could be a killer. And she was the third restaurant at that location in 4 years. So the directories were what I call NAP confusion, name, address, and phone number. NAP confusion on steroids. It was just a mishmash of who really was at that address. And so I looked at this idea of just doing a Google-only case study around her. And even though she had all these marketing drawbacks, there was a lot of possibility in terms of a case study. One, she had no existing digital footprint as a business, no directory listings anyplace, not even a Google listing. All she had was a Facebook page. The idea behind the Google-only approach was that it would be very inexpensive to implement. It offered a number of tools, from websites to posts, that I could test, and I could see which ones influenced visibility. And because I was doing it pro bono, I could take however much time I wanted to do each of the steps. And so I stretched it out over a very long period of time. So while this is a correlation study, the correlations are a little easier to assign to causality because there was so little going on in this account. From this, I developed a number of questions that I really wanted to answer. She was very active on Facebook, had a very engaged audience. Would Google or Facebook deliver more conversions given that she had no Google presence? Can a Google My Business website rank? At the time in 2018, a lot of SEOs thought that the one-page Google website was totally invisible, impossible to get to rank. I was curious if that was the case. And I wanted to understand, of the tools in the Google My Business, which ones could influence visibility and conversions. And then finally, because there was NAP confusion and because she had no presence, I wanted to see if we did everything else first, what impact would it have? Would she be able to succeed without citations? And would the massive NAP confusion goof up Google's understanding of her business in any way, the way it used to? And then finally, whether just doing a Google only thing in addition to her Facebook, whether she would see ongoing and sustained benefit and lift from that. So the guidelines and rules I set up for myself were pretty simple. No Google and Facebook only. no ad spend or boost on Facebook. I wanted to do tactics that in an ideal world, the business could initiate, and I wanted to train the owner to do as much as possible. I wanted to do as little as possible since I was doing it pro bono. And so I set an objective of less than 1 hour a month of my time to do this. Now, just a note, this is a correlation case study. It's a single business. It's anecdotal, which means it's one story. And I think that if you see value in what I did, this is easy enough to test for yourself and to determine. I know Joy has done a number of these tests herself and has determined which ones work. It's in its own. This is in a unique market, and local is very local. It's going to vary by competition, proximity to the searcher, and all these other things. And then the other is that the metrics I used Whitespark rank tracking, but beyond that, the KPIs were provided directly by Google My Business Insight and Facebook. And while I believe these are directionally accurate, there are issues with them. So there are some concerns with the study, but I think by doing it so slowly over such a long period of time that the conclusions that I've drawn still have validity. The goals I set were to rank for 12 breakfast-related terms, 12 lunch-related terms, and to increase these low funnel key performance indicators, phone calls, messages through Facebook, and driving directions, which indicated that people were very interested in your business. And so I took, this is a period of almost a year and a half to implement this. You can see the rough schedule that I took when I first drove my bike by her location, realized she didn't have a GMB presence. I walked in, I introduced myself, I convinced her to let me help her, which she didn't know who I was from Adam. There's no reason for her to trust me, but she did. And we immediately claimed the Google listing, got her to verify in GMB. We then built her a website on Google, which is an interesting tool. It's free. Price was right. Literally took a few minutes. Once we had the GMB, it populated all that data. Very easy to maintain because as long as she did the occasional post and updated her hours in GMB, it would be updated. It was mobile ready. It was good calls to action. It was very fast. At the time, HTTPS was just taking off, and it was HTTPS by default. So it was not a bad product for this particular experiment. Obviously, there's some weaknesses to it. It's a single page website, so there's no internal linking to speak of. Initially, I thought there were no control over title tags, which is obviously one of the levers that as SEOs we can control. There's no control over meta descriptions, no internal linking. Because you can't embed JavaScript on the page, there's no ability to include Google Analytics or other advanced functionality. So there are some limits to it as well. So I'm not necessarily suggesting it for every business, but for this particular situation where there was zero budget, it was an interesting option. So that first spring, I spent about 2 hours creating a listing on Google, getting it verified, creating her website. Took a few minutes to train her on posts. She was familiar with the idea from Facebook. Didn't take long. She gave me access to her Facebook page. We uploaded a few photos. So in this first quarter, in the first 2 months, I met my goal of less than an hour a month. And we then moved into the summer. She was actively posting on Facebook and, seeing some good traction, but clearly very active there, not anywhere near as active on Google. But surprisingly, during that summer, we started to see her website rank in Google Organic for 4 of the key phrases we were looking for. So, that was encouraging. It meant that we were on the right track. We also saw during the summer that with just what she had done, Google My Business, website, and a few posts, she saw 49 Google KPIs and 17 Facebook KPIs during that summer period, almost 3 times as many coming from Google as Facebook, which is not to say that she wasn't having good engagement with her clients at Facebook. She was, but these are people that already knew about her, and she was using it mostly as a way of staying in touch with them. It wasn't driving new traffic. So during this quarter, she, did Google posts, she did Facebook posts. I helped update a few photos. I spent most of my time, not very much, resolving questions of how to standardize metrics. So again, came well within budget on my time, in fact, under budget for this period, which brought us to the fall of that season. I was very excited to build out her menu. I pitched her on the whole idea. I thought, all this great semantic content, granular content about the business, the burgers, the 2 eggs over easy, all of this interesting stuff, which one would have thought would have driven search visibility. Unfortunately, on the one hand, she sent me this totally cocked up menu in some sort of publisher format that I ended up having to rekey the whole thing, wasted a Saturday morning. And in the end, we saw virtually no ranking improvement from October 5th when I did it through the end of November. No change in visibility, no change in rank. It was a very discouraging moment after having put all of that time in. But that late in November, early December, I was playing with the Google website and wondering about things like title tags and what I could do to make the single page website better. And I noticed this statement by Google where they were telling me to include the town in the description. So this is the headline on the page and the description on the page. And what I realized from that, and I spent about an hour and a half playing with it, was that Google was taking the headline, taking this description, and building out a title tag, which, I was finally figured out and made a fairly long title tag. In the original presentation, if you go see Together Up, you'll see some of the logic behind creating a long title tag. And what I saw was virtually instant results in the change to the title on the page, with dramatic boosts in rank for the next several weeks without doing anything other than having changed the title tag. What we saw in KPIs as she started seeing fewer and fewer new clients on Facebook, more and more new clients on Google. You can see that big jump in early December when I fixed the title tags. Google must likely gave us an increase in exposure. So I think, though, that this was demonstrated to me very clearly and answered that original question, that in terms of delivering new clients, new customers that she hadn't seen before, Google was killing it. So that quarter, she did Google posts, Facebook posts, at least some of them. I spent 2 hours on the menu. I think there's an object lesson in this: is be careful what you ask for from low-level clients. You may get a publisher document back, which ends up putting work on my table where I didn't really want it. Title tags took me an hour just to learn it. So I still came in on budget in 3 hours time, despite the learning and the struggle with the menu, which took us to early 2019. My goal had been to help her start looking at reviews at this point. In most local SEOs, I probably would have encouraged this much earlier, but she wasn't ready. And we at Gather Up had just developed a new product which we wanted to test, which is called TextBack. And she had a problem. She wasn't able to retrieve email addresses or cell phone numbers. She had no way to drive a review process. So what we did was we did signage for her tabletops, which encouraged her to then reminded her to mention to customers to just text the word review to her text number, and it would start the review process for her by the customer. So it was a process that fit how she was doing business as a small owner. She was serving the tables, had no capacity for gathering any other information. In the immediate quarter before the review implementation of TextBack, she had got 4 Google reviews and 1 Facebook recommendation during that period. And in the quarter immediately after, when she implemented this, she got 27 Google reviews, 5 Facebook recommendations, plus 11 first-party reviews. She got 9 times the review volume just by going from not asking to asking in some consistent, regular way using an automated system that she could then step back from and see the gains from. What did that do to visibility? We continued, it started where we see the arrow, end of December. We continued to see ranking gains throughout the quarter. Obviously now we're starting to see some, we don't know how much of this was due to the title tag change, how much was due to reviews. We think it was probably a little bit of both, but we were now ranking on 17 keywords as we moved to the end of that quarter. So from where we sat, it was pretty good progress on the visibility. In terms of the time spent, she continued to do her Google post. I put in about 2 hours. She had to change her process a little bit, just mentioned the table tent to the clients so that would encourage those that wanted to leave a review. Didn't require a big change of behavior on her part, but enough that she had to, to reach out to every customer, which she was doing anyways. So I had wanted her to do an interview with us to talk about text back. I chased her literally all spring quarter because we wanted to release text back. We wanted some content for our blog about real world usage. Literally chased her for 3 months before I could nail her down to get an interview. As a result of that interview, I was able to do 2 links, one from my blog and one from GatherUp. Very lightweight link building. But again, we saw immediate uptick and progress, not just on the top line of ranking terms, but improving some of the lower ranking phrases as well, moving them up this chart. So we did see relatively immediate progress from that. So again, another quarter passed. Whatever time it took me to build those 2 links, which was work, I was doing the work anyways, build them into the process, but it probably could be done within budget in a local market. Most local situations don't need that many links. So I decided, we'd gone through most of the very, very low-hanging fruit. I decided that during the summer, we would finally take the time to do a NAP cleanup and a citation campaign. I probably, from the purposes of testing, shouldn't have done both at the same time. So it would have been a little cleaner results because I think that there's probably different outcomes I think that I worked with Whitespark on both simultaneously, the NAP cleanup, getting rid of all the sort of restaurants at that location, as well as building out citations. And we did see some progress. You can see where we started that, which was August 23rd. Subsequent to that, we did see, a top line gain. We also, deeper in the search results in the local finder, we saw terms popping into the we saw more terms popping in at 60, 70 than we had seen before as well. So we saw a little top level gain, a little gain at the bottom. It wasn't dramatic. The conclusion I drew from that was that there was still value in citations, but that from a theoretical and practical point of view, I don't think the NAP cleanup, which is dogma that came out of 2008, 2009, 2010, pre-Google Knowledge Graph, I don't think that's as important anymore. So there was a one-time fee. We outsourced it of $299 to Whitespark and did see some citation benefit. I don't think the NAP cleanup was worth it. I don't think there was much benefit there. So I was able to draw some conclusions and the answers to my questions, whether Google or Facebook delivered more conversions. Pretty obvious, right? Could a Google website rank? Absolutely could. Which of Google's free tools impacted rank or visibility? We only did post, we did post and it seemed to help the website increase visibility. There's no direct correlation between posts and ranking that we can find, but it did create fresh content on the website. Whether that helped the website rank or just the other work we did. Menus had 0 impact. Reviews had obvious impact. She could rank without a citation campaign. We did do some good, but But most importantly, we came to the conclusion that all of this napkin fusion that existed wasn't a weight on her ascendancy. It wasn't holding her back. It wasn't that, this critical element like it used to be pre-knowledge graph. It was no longer that important. And I think the answer to whether a Google-only marketing strategy could provide benefit is self-evident. The answer is clearly yes. The takeaways that I came away with from this, that citations and map consistency is not what they used to be, that not every GMB service leads to a rank increase, that reviews work. They work to increase customer, new clients. They work to increase rank. They work to help the business understand, but you have to do reviews in a way that meets what the customer needs in terms of driving it regularly. It can't be one and done. It can't be expecting too much work from them. Links and I believe newspaper mentions are powerful. We didn't test that. And so when you map these against the duration on the ranking charts, what we can see is we can map these meaningful activities against significant increases in rank through time. When we looked at the overall Google versus Facebook KPIs, we saw 9x coming from Google. We interviewed her. Her sales doubled during this period. And when we did some back of the napkin math, figured that about 20% of that was coming directly from this digital campaign. So the question is, from an agency's point of view, how does this translate to become a business model? I think one way, if you want to try to address this very low end of the market, you can deep six expensive citation subscriptions. I think the idea that these smaller businesses really should not be burdened with a monthly fee for something that, while adding some value, probably doesn't add monthly value. I think that an agency can offer a Google-only entry-level service, and I think there's enough tools at hand that you can then prove its worth to a business using this as a stepping stone. Obviously, building out a reviews process can be helpful for long-term as well as a short-term benefit. And I think as an agency, though, you need to add value beyond just getting them to ask. You got to fit it into the business and make sure it's a good match. And then developing a few links and PR. I think this will put you as an agency able to offer this for a very, very low price and give you the ability to build a trusted relations, prove conversions, prove key performance indicators, and then ultimately upsell them to a real website and a full-on campaign. So I would make one final point to everybody that this restaurant, like many, is facing an existential moment in our culture right now. So even if you don't want to do this as a service, I would suggest that this is a great learning experience for your staff. It's a great public service, and certainly the restaurants could use it. So I would encourage every one of you to step out of your comfort zone and consider doing this and seeing what you can learn from it in a time of great need for these restaurants.
Absolutely brilliant. That was wonderful, Mike. Thank you very much. I'd seen that before, and seeing it in 30 minutes, I think we also got almost as much as we did in an hour when I saw it last time.
Hopefully not as much, but you never know.
Well, I think you brought it all down to the core necessities of what needed to be known. A quick mention that I believe the graphics that you were using, the visuals, are from GatherUp. Is that correct?
The ranking chart,
the dashboards.
The ranking charts are from Whitespark.
Right. Okay. Excuse me, I misunderstood. There were a couple of questions about that. I thought it was from your tool. Brilliant stuff. So, Greg, I'll allow you first pitch. Adding, what do you think about all of that?
Well, I think it's very interesting. I mean, Mike and I have talked about this in the past. This is the first time that I'm seeing the actual presentation as such. I don't have any questions about it, nor do I dispute any of it. I mean, I'll just full disclosure. I'm working now for Uberall, which is a company that does, among other things, manage citations and business listings across a network. And so Mike's trying to put me out of business, which I understand. No, so I just want to say one thing. I think for small businesses, for very small businesses with a single location, what he's saying is exactly right. What our data have shown is, and we deal with a lot of enterprises, some small businesses through partners as well. But when you've got a big enterprise with multiple locations, it does make, Uberall is one of many companies that does this. It does make a lot of sense to manage your data in a single source of truth across a lot of places. And we have seen visibility and engagement benefits, double-digit benefits from doing this complete business profile and then managing all your listings. I'm not trying to sell the service, but we presented some of this data to Mike a few weeks ago. So I think it really comes down to your particular situation, and but it's a really good case study. I would be interested. One of the thoughts that I had during this was the Facebook Google related.
Sorry, before digging into that, can we come on to Joy, and then we'll come to the questions, and we come back to that. So Joy,
no
please, can you give your points before we forget everything Mike said?
Yeah, so I definitely think that if you're working in certain industries, it's a lot easier to move the needle than others, right? So restaurants would be a great example of an industry that SEO sucks. They're all doing a terrible job with their websites and stuff. So it's easy to make a dent if you do a few things like changing your title tags can be super impactful. And we have some clients in industries like that. And it's just wonderful watching stuff just explode overnight, which is great. On the flip side, we also have clients in industries like lawyers where you can do all those things and it makes almost no dent because everybody else is already doing them and is about, a year or two ahead of you on various things. So I think the amount of impact each strategy will make does vary a lot depending on how competitive the industry is, which can be challenging for SEOs that are working in industries like dentists and lawyers that are insanely competitive.
Well, just a really quick question there. How do we know if our industry is competitive before we've actually started? I mean, I think we assume as marketers that people know this, but they don't necessarily know it.
Yeah, I mean, one way would be to look at, how many people are bidding on ads or, how many links the average ranking website has. That's one kind of way of looking at it. I also like to look at how many agencies out there specialize in that industry. There are so many agencies that specialize with dentists, not as many that do HVAC, for example.
Brilliant. Wonderful answer. Mike, so to finish this turnaround, anything to add to that?
Two things. One, just to Greg's point, there's other ways for large entities to manage canonical listing data. David Mim did a great case study at the last Local U, where he talked about a case study for a very large 2,500 entity healthcare facility, and they primarily use their website as the canonical listing information and saw similar gains. So I agree with Greg that it is important that they have canonical information, that it's well maintained, and a lot of times a service like Uberall can help them with that. But I think that they need to explore whether they can do it on their own as well. I think to Joy's point, I agree. I mean, every industry is different. Every physical relationship in every market ends up being different, right? It's not just the industry is different. But what we don't want to be doing is spinning our wheels with tactics that don't offer the client benefit, take time and or cost money, and somebody says somewhere that it's going to do good and it doesn't, right? So you want to use this to understand that not everything in the Google GMB pantheon is going to help you, right? From that point of view. And if it's too big of a job for the customer, too big of a job for you, maybe you should fill it out, maybe you shouldn't, but you need to understand it, right? So you don't want to put too much weight in GMB because it's just part of the picture. But I think this sort of helps clarify sort of baseline activity.
Brilliant stuff. Right, before we come to the questions, we've got absolutely boatloads. Quickly, Greg, can you explain the concept of the canonical idea that Mike was talking about really quickly? And also, as a very local business that isn't part of a big group, competing with a big group, what can I do?
Well, the second question is a really big question.
Sorry.
No, I mean, I think there's a consumer bias in favor of local business versus chains, and so you really want to really make yourself, you want to expose yourself. I mean, what Mike is talking about is part of how to do that. You want to be Google is really the place where most people will go before they need to make a decision about where to buy something. I mean, if you're a product seller, you need to explore how to get more of your inventory exposed online. If you're a service business, it's really primarily about Google, although social media can generate awareness, which then in turn generates search. It's a long conversation about sort of strategy and tactics. Okay. So sorry if that's disappointing, but we want to get to questions. In terms of the canonical question, I mean, Mike was sort of disputing the idea that NAP consistency matters. There are a lot of directories out there that nobody visits. And so in the old days, Google used to rely on them, sort of aggregate the data and use the consensus as the canonical information for the business. Now it can get the information directly through GMB and a few other places. It does look broadly at listings and citations, but it's de-emphasized that. So it's really, if you can do this, it's important to have your accurate data centralized in one place, whether that's your website or your website and using a third-party service provider. The bottom line is that consumers don't want to get the wrong information, wrong business hours, wrong address. That's the bottom line. So you need to have a mechanism for conveying that, and that can be your website.
Right. So, I mean, my conclusion that I draw from that is now GMB is pretty solid. NAPs are less important, but they remain something that is important to deal with.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, yes, correct. They do have a ranking benefit. It's not as pronounced as it was, but it's still. We have seen a lift in visibility and engagement from doing all these things correctly.
Right. Okay. Can we move on to Google Posts, and then we'll come back to reviews. First question is: are Google Posts worth doing? That seems to have come up a lot. Joy, I mean, what's your experience with Google Posts? It seems like you're shooting into the air and it doesn't really make any difference, or is that a mistaken concept or idea?
No, I think Google Posts are worth doing for most business types. What I don't really agree with is like doing one a week or investing a lot of time in them. Usually we use event posts so we can keep it up for a month or two and use it as kind of like a coupon or selling tool. But I'm actually doing a study right now where we're looking at 1,000 Google Posts for clients of ours to see which types of posts actually resulted in the most conversions. So I'm hopefully going to be presenting that at our next Local U event, but they are worth doing. We're just trying to connect some patterns on like which types are better.
Brilliant. Okay, and Anthony Delino, excuse me, has asked, how can you get people to engage with your posts? I mean, obviously pushing them out there. Any tips there? Mike, for example, have you got tips for getting people to engage with those posts?
Only theoretically. I mean, Google does allow a consumer to follow a business in Google Maps, and there are this featuring posts where you can offer a first-time discount for people who follow you. It would require a lot of work because consumers aren't used to it, businesses aren't used to it. It would require a lot of in-store communication to make that happen. I'm not sure it's worth the effort to take that extra step. I would love to see some research whether that engagement generates rewards. I don't know that it would. So I don't know that you need to worry about it quite so much from that point of view. I think the page gets a lot of exposure. Your business brand, your knowledge graph gets a lot of exposure on Google. And recently they changed posts, so they're now more persistent in both desktop and mobile views. Right. And so I think just controlling that space with good communications, good imagery via posts, and good messaging offers value to your brand. Some of them can convert. We've seen, it's not crazy high, but if you can make it a low level activity, I think you can still get return from it. So I think the best practice right now is don't get too crazy about it, but I would suggest experimenting with the extremes to see if you can get something from them.
Can I make two quick points very quickly?
Yep.
Jason?
Yeah,
So-
no, go ahead. Sorry, I was
Yeah,
going to say, Greg, you have something to say.
No, just real quickly, back to the point about how does the local shop compete with a chain. Anything you can do to bring personality, your sort of local bona fides online, posts can be one of those, is valuable. Lots of photographs, etc. in GMB. I would guess, and Joy's study is not yet complete, but I would guess posts that contain discounts and offers, vouchers, are going to be the most effective. If you're just saying it's a beautiful day today, come on down and say hi, that's going to be much less effective than 25% off for today only, that kind of thing. So I think it really goes to what the content is, but we'll wait and see what Joy's study reveals.
Does that, excuse me, Joy, in that case, can I bring that on to Vika Fisetti's question? Do you recommend sharing blog content on GMB? That would suggest that blog content doesn't make for great posts.
Yeah, I can say quite certainly that blog content almost never converts because it's showing up for people that are doing branded searches for the most part. So these are people that maybe have heard of you somewhere else, or they're just looking up something and you want to try to entice them to call you. Blog content generally doesn't do that.
Right.
We have seen 2 case studies, one in the auto industry where it worked well for oil changes, and another in the medical industry where it worked well to generate additional appointments.
Brilliant. Okay, right. Can we move on to reviews? Because we have Megan Van Eden who's asking, have you got any great tips or strategies on how to get more GMB reviews above and beyond putting a note on the table to yourself to remind your clients to give you a review or to use the text service? Greg, getting more reviews, I think kind of we all agree it's necessary, it's needed, and getting the quality reviews. How do you do it?
Well, I'm to some degree I'll defer to Mike since that was his bread and butter. But I would say at a conceptual level, there's a tactical question: what's the most efficient process? Google has a tool that can allow you to solicit reviews. You need to ask for them, and you need to ask for them uniformly. The data consistently show that if you asked 100% of your customers for reviews, you would on balance have more positive reviews than negative reviews. Often business owners are afraid to do that, or they want to gate reviews. Did you like us? Then go here. Did you not like us? Then go over here. You don't need to worry about that. Most people are going to say positive things. You want some critical reviews. You don't want only 5-star reviews, because then people will be skeptical of the accuracy or the veracity of those reviews.
Right. I love that question about gating them. I think we're all tempted to say, oh, I'm really scared of getting the bad reviews. But I mean, if you're getting bad reviews, then your service isn't great. Joy, gating reviews, bad idea?
Yeah, actually, funny timing. We just had a client yesterday whose competitor just lost all the reviews because they were gating. So don't,
brilliant.
It's not a good idea.
Excuse me, sorry.
No, not a good idea.
I've also done some large scale research. We had one client that was doing a lot with, they switched from gating one day to the next to not gating. We saw review volume go through the roof after they stopped gating. And we saw average rating hardly decline. It was a fraction of 1/100%. It was a very small decline in average rating, but volume went through the roof when they stopped gating. So the indications to me are not only is gating a problematic from Google's point of view, from the FTC's point of view, it's also problematic from the consumer point of view. They're smart enough to smell it and they're willing to give you reviews. Just ask them, ask everybody. And what we find in terms of what does best, a personal ask combined with an automated follow-up for most businesses is the best combination.
And sorry, I'm just Greg. I mean, I'm going to ask you to come in here with the fact that I think a lot of business owners think it isn't worth the effort, or they forget, or it doesn't seem important. I think that is very obviously untrue.
Yes, I mean, reviews obviously have a ranking benefit. I mean, this is one of Google's explicit statements. People often wonder, does responding to reviews impact rankings? Probably not, or no is the short answer. But review volume, and review quality, meaning ratings, definitely impacts visibility. And so you absolutely need to ask for reviews. You also want reviews because you want to know how you're doing. I mean, reviews contain all kinds of valuable information about your service, your product, your customers' needs. I mean, this is a gold mine of information for your business that has all kinds of implications that you actually want. I mean, people do reviews because they think it's going to be a rankings give them a rankings benefit, but you really want to understand your customers and what their response is to your business. And so that's another reason to do reviews.
That's a brilliant answer. Wonderful stuff. Question about websites. Now, kind of, we've done reviews. Now that some of the websites, we've got a few more kind of topics to cover. Websites. Do I need a website? I mean, Mike says Google's your homepage. Maybe I can just forget about the website. Should I be using the Google example? Should I be using Wix? Should I be investing in a WordPress site? Joy, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a restaurant in a really small town, you probably don't need a website if you don't have a budget. But if you're in a competitive industry or a big city, then yeah, you absolutely need one.
Right. And sorry, just quickly, any advice about how to go about it? I mean, the self-build stuff like Wix, the WordPress stuff, which gets very complicated. Is Wix as bad as people suggest? And is Google's own offering any good?
Yeah, Google's offering is really limited. So like Mike was saying, you can't really do much with like linking, internal linking. It's one page. Like there's so many limitations. So I would say WordPress is, my go-to because it's, I think, I don't know if WordPress is better than Wix. Like I didn't get into that whole competition, but like for SEOs, if you're hiring a marketing company, SEOs are familiar with WordPress. So it makes their lives easier. And if you're paying an SEO, you're paying for time. So your ROI will be better if they know what they're doing and it's easy to use. Right, brilliant. And talking about WordPress, I mean, if you do choose to go the WordPress route, you're immediately being more ambitious. Something like the Yoast Local SEO pack. I mean, has anyone got an opinion about that? I'll throw that one out to anybody who wants to answer. We use, I believe, Rank Math, which is a competitor of theirs. But, I feel like everybody's got opinions on which one's better for different reasons. But that's the one we use. Okay, perfect stuff. Wonderful. So, do we need a website, Mike?
Yeah, I think every business should have a website. It is a key thing that Google looks at to understand your business. So, if you want to increase entity understanding, a multi-page website. It doesn't have to be huge, but it should cover who you are, what you do, where you do it, and the what you do should be each have its own page, right? So, even a small business should have an 8-10 page site with good internal linking, good architecture. And I think that they will see significant benefits from that. If you can't afford it, or if you're suspicious of it, see what you get with a Google My Business website. If it pays off, then make the next step into a full website. But as far as, Wix, they're pretty, I've dabbled with them. They're pretty constrained. They're really hard to make visible. They have, serious impediments. So I do typically recommend WordPress just because for what the reasons Joy said, but also because we know that there's a lot of plugins for it and that it can be made to work really well. So I typically recommend WordPress.
And with Greg, I'd like to angle that question to the canonical idea. If you have your own website, you actually start to control the message that you're sending out to Google. Is that an important aspect? Having a website allows you control of information about yourself.
In a word, yes.
And sorry, the question then is, Mike was saying break it down by product. Somebody's asking, WCamp, how important is it to add departments inside a business? Obviously, that's within Google My Business. I mean, this idea of departments, I have these different services I'm offering, breaking it down page by page in a website and on Google My Business, important or not?
I think, I'll leave it to Joy and Mike to talk about some of the technical things. But I think that more information online is better, is always better. It's better from a Google exposure standpoint. It's better from an end customer standpoint. I mean, now because so many people start making decisions online, the more information you have about what you do that you can disseminate, the better off you are. If your information is very superficial, that's going to mean less exposure. It's going to mean you're not informing customers, and they're going to be inclined to choose. They're looking for information. You should provide it to them if it's relevant to what you're doing.
Wonderful. And now we're moving on to lots of questions. Ryan Clark's asking, my main office address is in a building that has a lot of small business. I think a lot of people have this problem. Does this cause NAT confusion? I mean, the fact that I'm sharing my address with lots of different people, what do I do? Joy, I mean, Ryan is obviously worried about the fact that there are multiple businesses with the same address.
Yeah, it's not a problem at all unless they are in the same industry. So we do run into this problem quite a bit with lawyers because there tend to be like high-rise towers that have like 15 of the same type of lawyer, and it is a huge problem because of filtering that happens. But if you're like in a building with 15 other people and they're all in different industries, there's no issues at all.
Right. Okay, Mike, can I ask a question of you? Because John Barry's saying, I have an online business without a physical address. Is that possible? I mean, we all have a physical address. The business has an address, even though it's just a website. What do you do in those circumstances?
Well, Google's GMB requirement is that they have in-person interaction with their customer base, or at least some. And so if they don't meet that criteria, they're not technically eligible for a listing at Google, in which case you do AdWords, you do organic, you do whatever you need to do other than GMB. But if you do have in-person interactions, whether you're company headquarters, which you can get a listing for a company headquarters. But Google does allow for businesses that do have in-person interactions to not show their address. It's called a service area business, or an SAB. Google handles that use case, assuming that they do have these in-person interactions.
Right. Okay. Because well, that brings me to another question, which is kind of international. Because you guys are all Canadian, North American, American. I'm from Europe. European local businesses just keep popping up, and it's not a question of eligibility. Google's creating them even when I don't want them. Is that something that stopped in America, or it never happened?
No, it happens all the time. Google multi-sources data. They are a data hog. They love data, and they buy it wherever they can get it, or they steal it wherever they can get it, or they scrape it wherever they can get it. And they are looking to try to stay on top of new business creation. And sometimes business owners need to go in, like I dealt with a business owner that didn't want his business there, who wasn't doing in-person work with customers, and Google actually took it off the Maps database. So, but people need to be aware that Google is in the process of actively trying to stay abreast of new business creation. They see it as critical to their mission and to what they're doing for consumers.
Yeah, and sometimes they goof and we need to go in and clean it up. So, I mean, a lot of this is actually cleaning up the mess that Google's making, mess in inverted commas, that Google's making by trying to stay ahead of the game. Can we move on to something else? John Watkinson asked, how important are the big OTAs such as TripAdvisor, Booking.com? Are they game changers, or are we now looking at them as just a bonus? I mean, Mike, that question has to go to you. You're saying, yeah, just Google, we can do a good deal.
Well, no, I mean, I'm agreeing with Joy that at the very low end, just Google works. But once you get beyond the very low end, then you need to understand that there are a lot of vertical directories that are still doing a job. The general purpose directories are falling by the wayside, or have fallen. The city searches of the world, even Yelp is in terrible headwinds, but the vertical directories are still pulling their weight. Google looks at their reviews. Many of them generate direct business for your business. So it's very category specific, whether you have good vertical directories. I think minimally you want to look at using them for reviews, because Google looks at reviews at these vertical directories just like reviews at Google. And some of the better directories, like House, for example, drives a fair bit of conversions, could be 20, 25%. What's important is that you measure it so that you can allocate your budget to the amount of conversions you're getting. You don't want to, just because Yelp makes big noise doesn't mean they send big business. And you need to understand what the reality is.
Right, and those reviews are getting sometimes pulled into Google My Business, and you need to keep an eye on that on a case-by-case basis, I would imagine.
Well, Google in your brand search often will show third-party reviews. It will highlight them predominantly on the page.
Greg, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so 2 points. I mean, I think in agreement with what Mike was saying, many of these vertical directories are destinations in a way that some of the horizontal ones have ceased to be. So consumers are going directly to their preferred destination to look for information. And they may use Google as a navigational tool, but they're really doing most of their work within the directory, hotels.com, booking.com, whatever it is. It's also the case that these directories will often rank very highly in local SEO, so you get the benefit of that as well. If you're prominent on the directory, somebody does a search for hotels London, then your boutique hotel may benefit from what has been called, I think Will Scott was the source of this, barnacle SEO, meaning you're sort of attached to a larger entity that is ranking. So there's that dimension of it as well.
Okay, and next question for you as well, Greg, is Vicky Pfister is asking about multiple locations. I mean, ranking for multiple locations appears to be kind of something that people are very confused about. In the sense that, sorry, I misrepresented the question. He is looking to rank in nearby towns for his own business within his own town. Does that make sense?
So that's a service area, right? That's essentially, he's a single business, but he serves multiple areas.
Exactly.
I'm going to send it over to Joy Hawkins.
Brilliant. I love it.
Yeah, well, depending on the industry, for some clients, service area pages still work really well. If it's super competitive, I actually told one of my clients the other day in Philadelphia that if he's looking at any strategy to invest in this year, it would be opening another office or two in a suburb that's less competitive, because it'll be easier to rank since his industry is insane and Philadelphia is insane. So I think like for some businesses, having a small office, as long as it's staffed and you've got signs and stuff, the lease and the other expenses that go along with that will pay for itself because of the ranking benefit you get.
Brilliant answer.
Quick addendum. I mean, I think there is probably still some value to creating, rich landing pages for different locations, depending upon the industry, as Joy is saying. I mean, there's a whole fascinating conversation about landing pages that we won't get to have on this discussion, but it exists.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. Now, can we come back to reviews? I mean, I would love to talk about that because I've got loads of examples. And anyway, back to reviews. Sorry, we'll stick on topic. Jane Weiss is asking, can you run a contest to promote reviews? Review our site for a chance to enter and win an iPad. Is that a good idea? Bad idea? Is Google going to kill you?
It's a terrible idea. Firstly, it violates.
Sorry, Jane.
It violates most truth in advertising laws and endorsement laws in most countries, the United States with FTC and elsewhere. Secondly, it's against the Google terms of service. And so if you are caught doing it, you can lose all your reviews. Somebody reports you, you'll get escalated to Google, you'll lose your reviews. And then finally, the biggest danger with it, and I've seen this happen, where customers realize that the reason you got so many good reviews is you were incentivizing them, and then they leave a review saying as much, to me, is the biggest ding on your reputation. It's going to stay there forever. The FTC penalty may go away. You may overcome the Google loss of reviews, but you can never overcome the customers who wrote bad reviews about you because you were incentivizing other customers who maybe feel deceived, like they may have felt deceived. They saw all these good reviews, and then they realize you're incentivizing them. They realize that maybe they were cheated, and that's the worst kind of review to get. So there's multiple reasons to not do it.
There are some sites where you can do it. I mean, it shows up in native reviews and products review situations. It's not, I mean, you really need to be mindful that these different sites have different terms. And so one site may tolerate a behavior that another site doesn't. I mean, Yelp is the strictest, but Google is sort of close behind. So you really need to adhere to sort of the ethical best practice, which is never pay directly or indirectly for a review. I mean, we've got some research coming out a little bit later, hopefully relatively soon, where we looked at 4 million reviews across 4 major directories: Facebook, Google, TripAdvisor, and Yelp, for instances of fraud, and it's pretty high in many of these categories. So it's a big problem with a lot of people trying to fake reviews, mostly in favor of themselves, and it's you need to really adhere to an ethical guideline.
And just one note: if you do have a directory where it is okay to incentivize reviews, the reviews themselves have to so note, to be compliance with FTC laws, that they've been incentivized, which to me reduces the value of the review. They're no longer objective. But that's the FTC requirement, that if you have an incentive with a review, that it has to be noted in the review.
And outside the USA, it's not the FTC, it's other organizations, but the laws are liable to be pretty similar. Joy, you were trying to say something there, I think.
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh, right. Okay. You unmuted yourself, and I thought you were going to leap in with a comment that added to that. So we have another question, which is actually kind of a question about websites. I mean, I'm assuming that Jenny Hall is asking about, I have my GMB, but I don't yet have a website. Or sorry, my website is ranking. Do I link my website to the GMB, or do I create a Google website immediately and try to double my presence by cheating Google by making it think that that my website is something else?
You definitely want to link to your. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Mike was shaking his head, but Joy, please answer.
Yeah, sorry. You definitely want to link to your website if you have one. It would likely outrank a Google website.
Yes, the page you link to on your website, usually in small business, it's the home page, is a canonical resource for Google, and the strength of that page drives local ranking. So you really want to be linking to the strongest page for that location, whether that's on a multi-location site or, you want to link to the strongest page. That's going to help your listing more than anything.
Am I right in clarifying by saying that the canonical that everyone's talking about is the reference that Google will come back to and look and check on?
That's correct. Like your homepage is a resource for Google that is associated with your GMB, and the strength of that resource in terms of its prominence helps drive GMB visibility.
Right. So isn't the fundamentally most important thing for you to identify to Google what that canonical source is and make the most of that canonical source and drive everything out from that canonical source?
Yes, that would be my recommendation, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you. Oh, I like that. It was a lovely conclusion. That's the end of the time today. I'll give each and every one of you, all three of you, in fact, one last word. What would you add to that, Joy, that we haven't covered that you think we should have done?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say if people are looking to learn more about SEO in general or local SEO in general, like Mike is a great person to follow on Twitter. So Twitter is, I feel like, where a lot of good information is shared across the local SEO industry. So that's where I would go.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Mike?
I would say follow Joy, but more importantly, go to Local U. I think Local U has become the canonical source for original, strong thought leadership in the field. And if you read the blog, join the forums, come to the webinar.
Oh, that's very quotable, Bill.
Thanks, Mike.
It's become the canonical source. Amazing. Greg, one last comment. What did we miss, or what could be added?
We didn't talk about landing pages, as I said, but we talked about a lot of stuff. We covered a lot of things. I mean, I think just continue to educate yourself, follow trusted people who give good advice, who don't have conflicts of interest, and just keep at it, and you will become masters of local in time.
Absolutely brilliant. I'm really, 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 really happy with that. There was so much good information. Mike's presentation was amazing. Joy, you added so much value. Greg, too. And the questions were amazing. I'm sorry we didn't get the names of the people up on screen, but I hope I mentioned them and I pronounced them correctly. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Semrush. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Anton. And thank you to everybody who is anywhere near any of us right now. Have a lovely, lovely, lovely day, evening, or midday, or afternoon, whatever time it is for you in the world.